Okay guys, we're here with the white 5.0, the car that does not want to go away, and I have installed a brand new Motorcraft ignition module. There she is. If you'll note, earlier on I said this thing looks like a cheap Chinese ignition module. It does. It looks like a cheap Chinese ignition module. I think Motorcraft sold us out on this one. I don't think they make them anymore, and I think they buy them from China. So we're about to test it. But before I do, I want to explain a little bit about what's going on with this car in general. It came in for idle problems. We found it had a bad computer. The capacitors in it were bad, which is really typical for these cars. It had a bad TPS sensor. TPS sensors are a wear item. There's our guy. And it was intermittently bad. It would only drop out once in a while and cause the car to idle really poorly at random. So that was part of the idle problem. We found that it had some bad connections on the 10-pin connectors. That's these guys, the back of the intake. That's also a typical 5-liter problem. So we patched them up and spread the terminals and made them make good contact. This is all kind of stuff that happens all the time on 5-liters. It's actually not very unusual for a car to have multiple problems. And then I guess our last thing that we found was that the car has had a bad ignition module. So when we were test driving it, the car was really happy, but every once in a while it would just stall. So we brought it back, did some testing, and sure enough, the ignition module is bad. You could tap on it or touch it or wiggle it, twist it, and it would make the car stall out. So no big deal. I stock them like I stock all Ford TFI parts because they fail that often that I just bring them with me to job sites. And I put a brand new Motorcraft $50 whatever ignition module on this thing. And well, I'm going to bring you guys along. Oh look, awesome, it runs, right? And it quits running. Runs all of 5 seconds and stalls out. This is actually a lot worse than it was yesterday when it ran for 20 or 30 seconds and stalled out. Somehow when the module warms up, it actually tends to run longer and better. But this thing's got a bad Motorcraft ignition module straight out of the box. And to make sure I wasn't wrong about that, like I always do, I tested it. I got the Picoscope 4423 hooked up, and my connections are the yellow channel goes into injector control on injector number 1. The blue channel goes to the PIP sensor in the distributor. That's the sensor that's inside the distributor sending a signal to both the module and the computer. That PIP sensor signal travels from the inside of the distributor through the module to the computer. So the module is a pass-through on that one. But the module also gets a copy of that signal. So it's an active pass-through. The next trace is the green trace. That is power to the ignition module. I had the yellow trace hooked up to this, which was ground to the ignition module. And what I found was power and ground were both good, so I repurposed the yellow trace on over to the injector so I could watch it as well. And then the last trace is the red channel. That is going to coil negative, which is what turns the coil on. And I chose to do this at the ignition module to make sure there wasn't a wiring problem, that it was actually the module that was causing any problems there. So we got it all hooked up, and here's the data. I hope you guys can see this at all because it's really bright out, but bear with me. I'll try to get you a clean shot. Alright, let's see if I can see this thing. Maybe I can shield it some. That's about as good as I'm going to get. So here's what we're looking at. The green trace shows 12-volt power. Those little dips you see are when the power dips, when the module is actually turned on. It draws a little bit of power down from 12 volts every time it turns the module on. The 12 volts basically remains the entire time. So we do not have a problem with the voltage. You can see the scale over here, maybe. The voltage remains steady on the 12-volt line the entire time. I already tested the ground. You'll have to take my word for it. There's only 4 channels on the scope, but the ground stayed 0 volts the whole time too. The next one here is the yellow trace. This is the injector pulse. As you can see, I've got injector pulse here, even after I do not have coil firings. The blue trace is the pip signal. That's the sensor in the distributor, and it just keeps on trucking. There's no problem with the pip signal. It gets different as time goes on, and you'll see that on the next page if I show it to you. The pip signal continues, but basically what's happening is the car is stalled already, and the pip signal is continuing to spin until the distributor finally comes to a stop. The red trace is the ignition coil ground. This is the spark happening. So you see that those big spikes and the big upward notches here. This is the coil firing each time, and all of a sudden the coil just stops firing. And yet the pip sensor in the distributor is still going. The injector is still being fired. The 12 volts is still happening at the module. This car has everything it needs. It's just not sparking. And the module is in charge of that. There's the second page to that, and there's really nothing there to see. Oh, I can zoom out a little bit though. Here's the zoom function where we're seeing this in a lot more rapid succession. So there's, dozens, if not hundreds, of pulses here. And you can see in the end that the blue injector the blue pip signal just keeps on going. The coil just stops. The injector keeps on going, and the 12 volts keeps on going. So that is absolutely awesome. Nothing like spending top bucks for a genuine Motorcraft module, only to find out it's probably no better than the $9.99 Chinese special. Really disappointed with Ford on this one. And I think I'll be sending them a copy of this video. I don't know when they quit doing genuine modules at Ford, but when you look at one of those modules, it says Motorcraft on it and it's stamped and embossed in the module. That's from the good days. They didn't have problems with modules then, at least not like they do now. They've always had some problems with modules. But this new one that's smooth and just has DU2J stamped into it, the part number stamped into it, doesn't say Motorcraft on it anywhere on the module. It's just a cheap Chinese module they're reboxing, I'm sure of it. It doesn't look anything like the ones that we've seen for years. I'll try to get you a good shot of this thing. That's probably about as good as I can get. Anyway, huge piece of junk. So it stalls out regularly. The other day it only stalled out every few minutes, but now it seems to stall out like every time I fire the car up. It only runs a few seconds. I did get it to run for like 20 minutes the other night. It seems like the hotter the module gets, the better it works. There it goes. Let's see if I caught that on tape. Yeah. There's the pip sensor with nothing else in sight. Green's 12 volts. It looks like it's about 14. That's good. Injector's not being caught on here. No spark. The next to last page will tell us the story. No, we still have injector pulse. We still have pip. And we have nothing on the module except for a bunch of fuzz. Let's zoom in and take a little look at that. Oh, a little too much. Sorry about that. I didn't realize you got to mute your phone. All right, zooming in. I'm sure the video quality here stinks. It's really bright outside and the glare on this laptop's not good at all, but this is what I get. The module goes from sparking away, that's coil firings, to just one flat line. And that line is, about between 5 and 14 volts. It looks like it's actually being switched rapidly. That line's not totally dead. If it was, it'd be a thin flat line. So that's kind of interesting. Just for fun, let me zoom in on that. See if I can see anything in there. It's rapidly switching. Very rapidly switching. The Pico can zoom in till the cows come home. It's almost meaningless when you get to a certain point, but you can see that that's actually not a solid line. There's distinctive up and down points there. Hey Keith, how you doing, buddy? Keith DeFazio. He's the man up in New York for drivability. What am I working on here? Keith, you're going to love this. You'll have to watch the video from the start, but we're working on a Mustang GT 5.0 from back in the day, and I just stuck a brand new Motorcraft ignition module on it, and it stalls out in just a matter of seconds, and this is really cool. So what we come up with is that the new module's bad, and I'll zoom in on the signal here and you can check it out. Green trace is 12 volts to the module. I already tested ground on a separate test and ground was fine. The yellow trace is injector pulse width and it stays, it keeps going. The blue trace is pip signal and it keeps going. And the red trace is the secondary ignition coil and it just stops even though the pip signal keeps going. The injector pulse keeps going, and 12 volts to the and ground to the module keep going. Does it stall with the spout connector removed? It did to me the other day, but we can test it again for fun. I think that's a good test. Make sure we take the computer out of the equation, right? All right, spout connector's removed. Now watch it not stall. The problem is I've been letting this thing sit with the key on, and every time I do that, I think the module warms up and starts working. So I might have to let it cool off a little bit to make absolutely sure. Let's try it. Well, so far so good. Yes, sir, it was a brand new Motorcraft ignition module. The problem is once this module warms up, it doesn't do it. So every time I let it runs longer. And if I leave the key on in the ignition, it warms the module up, I think, and it starts working better. So now I gotta I got to double check that. So I'm going to leave the key off for a while. Make sure that's completely off. Yeah. I got to leave the key off for a while, let it get as cold as I can, and then retest the module with the spout connector removed. I've seen this before. I saw a Paul Danner video on that one time. Is the notch gone completely on the pip signal now? Keith asking me. Keith is a top-notch diagnostician, guys, so his suggestions are worth checking. We'll go back and take a look. Spread that out a little bit. No, Keith, the notches in the pip signal remain. The only one that doesn't have a notch looks like it's the signature pip. Yeah, even signature pip has a notch in most of them. Thought I saw it a minute ago without a notch, but let me double check. Yeah, right there, that one doesn't have a notch. It's kind of interesting, the next one does. And the next one does. Just that one signature pip doesn't have a notch. That one right there after it quits firing. Okay, when it's running, signature pip doesn't have a notch, but when it quits running, it does. I don't know how long this will take to cool off, Keith. I'll give it another try. Spout's still removed. It's only cooled off for a minute or two, but let's just see if it stalls real quick. I think I've been slid, brother. All right, I'm going to let the module cool off and double test to make sure that it's not related to spout. One more thing to check. What a nightmare. By the way, this car didn't have this problem before till we did the module, so the old module would run for half an hour before it would act up, and it would only act up once in a while and stall out and then start right back up. The new module, it dies almost immediately when you start the car, so it's easy to blame the module, but I guess we can double check and make sure there's nothing else going on. All right, guys, I'm going to let the module cool off and test again. Talk to you later.